Good evening and welcome to Face the Nation. Today is the 8th of March 2021, which marks International Women's Day. Now, this day is meant to create awareness on women's issues and challenges faced. Now, the purpose of this program is not to tokenize this day, but indeed to use it as fuel to have a fruitful discourse on the advancement of women in a multitude of spheres, in the legal, psychosocial, as well as political and other developing spheres. Now, at the same time, we will focus our attention on the issues that are systemic, which need urgent redressal. During the course of the discussion, we will also discuss the strides made by amazing women. Now, I would like to also draw your attention to one of my personal examples, which I can draw reference to. The Capital Maharaja Group, in its 90-year history, has produced some of the most amazing, trailblazing women in the corporate sphere. And I'd like to pay tribute to them as well. We have a fantastic panel of guests this evening, and I'm so humbled to host this discussion on a national platform to bring to you this fruitful discourse, as I said once before, to not just speak about issues that may face you and I, but also issues that really need urgent reform. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you our first guest this evening, Ms. Manori Piris, a senior attorney at law. Good evening and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sonali.
Our second guest tonight is Professor Pianjali De Souza, Professor in Clinical Psychology, Department of Psychiatry, Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo. Good evening and welcome.
Thank you, Sonali.
Ms. Farial Ashraf also joins us tonight. She's a former minister, incidentally the first Muslim woman cabinet minister in Sri Lanka. Good evening and welcome. It's lovely to have you on tonight's show. And last but not least, Bhumi Harendran, Executive Director, National Transgender Network, Sri Lanka. Welcome to the show, Bhumi. Great. So, your questions will be asked by myself as well as three of my colleagues, two of whom are joining us now. Nadeem Majid, thank you for joining us, and thank you for being an ally, a true ally in women's advancement. We're also joined by Pavani Hapuarachi from News First. And finally, we'll be joined by Azra Asan. She will be joining us shortly. My first question this evening is for Dr. Pianjali De Souza, Professor in Clinical Psychology, Department of Psychiatry, Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo. Professor, oftentimes when we speak of issues faced by women and gender-based violence, we tend to steer away from psychological aggression towards women, where women are humiliated, bullied, belittled. So the violence is not so much physical as it is psychological. And this is rampant in society. How do you view this, and how do you think Sri Lanka and Sri Lankans need to go about overcoming this issue?
Sonali, now, I think for decades you've spoken about physical violence, isn't it, against women, and that's done, though it's still very, very rampant. But a topic that we really haven't spoken about is how women are belittled, humiliated. The impact is purely psychological. Ghosted. Sometimes you try to reach out to your partner, they don't respond to your calls, they don't respond to your text messages for weeks, days and months. Financial violence, where the man may be taking your daily allowances and salary and spending it on his needs, or restricting the finances that the woman has to spend on the household. Belittling the woman in front of other people like relatives and in-laws and neighbors. And another thing which is very interesting is where what you call gaslighting, this psychological term, where the woman is led to believe that what she's saying is a non-truth. And after some time, the woman believes, yes, she starts getting confused. with the reality and what she's saying. It's a huge psychological tool that certain men use. Now, because it is not physically visible on the body, it is not easily identifiable, but it is rampant, Sonali, particularly in conventional patriarchal societies like South Asian countries like ours. So I think the first thing we need to do is, just as we did with physical violence, we need to talk about it. And that's what we discussed, isn't it, before the program, that we should talk about it with our viewers, that this can happen, you may be subjected to it, and if you are subjected to it, know that this is a form of violence. Because what happens, Sonali, is that women who are subjected to this doesn't realize it. They think that this is the norm. It is not the norm. And if you feel that, yes, something is strange in your romantic relationship, usually it happens in a romantic partnership, you need to talk to somebody that you trust, who is sane, and to check whether your reality is actually true or not. There are also psychological services that a woman can go to in the government and private sector if you feel you are in a psychologically abusive context.
Right. Thank you very much, Professor Pianjali de Souza, for your opening remarks. I'd like to move my attention now to Ms. Farial Ashraf, former minister. My question to you is, how do you feel about the abysmal participation of women in national politics? First, I'd like an answer to that question from you as a woman, secondly, as a woman from the Islamic faith, and thirdly, as a woman from the Islamic faith who joined politics in Sri Lanka. What do you feel about the abysmal participation of women in national level politics, and how must we as a society overcome these obstacles that women face so rampantly?
Well, to start off in a lighter vein, I think the women are being very smart, not wanting to go into an area where they're going to be slandered or being belittled or whatever. So in a way, it seems quite clear to women that this is not a safe place to be as it is. It's like, it's rather tough out there, right? And how the professor just said, I mean, the psychological impact of fighting a battle out there is not just going in and taking part in politics. I mean, when your opponent is a person of the opposite gender, how you are treated, right? So the stories that come out are not always very pleasant, right? So, I mean, that is reason why I think most women tend to keep away from it, though I'm sure they would do a much better job if they are given the opportunity to go in there.
Absolutely, and shouldn't we create these opportunities for women of the future to at least get into politics?
So there it's a question of bringing about awareness about what politics is all about. If I may say so, right now in Sri Lanka, entering parliament or entering any political forum seems like, I mean, you're trying to do development work, or you're trying to make money, or you make a lot of money, or you spend a lot of money hoping that you would be able to make that money once you get in there. So the intention of going into politics is also a little questionable, right? Why you want to be in politics? What do you hope to do? So there's a whole lot of awareness that needs to be given to our people, especially the women. And the best part is to first tell the women how important it is for a woman to be there where decisions are being made.
Absolutely.
So the woman must understand that it is a decision that is being made about her, and she is not there, right?
Yeah.
So all this, I think, is going to take a little time, and I know a lot of women groups are working on it, and I can only wish them all the best.
Yes, and on that same note, Ms. Ashraf, what about the role of men in also enabling women to be in decision-making rooms, shouldn't men also be allies? And why do you think the parliamentarians, the male parliamentarians, most of the time act like hooligans? Like, is there any rationale to this sort of mentality?
I wouldn't say that it's just the parliamentarians who are acting like that. It just goes to show the society that we live in. These are only representatives of this society of ours. So you can understand what it is like. I mean, when you see them behaving in that manner, and that is what Sri Lanka, with such a long-standing, rich civilization, culture we talk about, and education, the literacy rates, and so on and so forth. And then what you see out there, and especially since now we have the TV showing all this, I mean, when you are able to see, it's only a reflection of the society. And especially where a woman is concerned, we are still in that process of a patriarchal society where they still believe that a woman's role is in the home, right? Okay, tend to whatever, look after children or bear children or continue to be a machine bringing out children or whatever. That hasn't changed much, right? And then there's also this thing about, again, as I told you, what is politics? Why do you get in there, right? Never mind what. Right, you have to get the vote, right? And once you are in there, never mind what, you got to retain that seat.
Right.
Okay, somebody will take it and run away if you're not very careful, right? So then, what do you do? I mean, that's not a point where you think about gender balances and whether women are needed and so on. That is just there. You got to be on that hot seat, right? And then you got to preserve it, right? So it's accepted. So it's a complete change, a paradigm shift is what we require. I mean, what is politics and what are we hoping to do for this country? How are we going to take it forward? So a whole lot of learning or relearning, I think, is required.
Absolutely. Beautifully put. Thank you very much, Ms. Farial Ashraf. I'd like to move my attention now to Senior Attorney at Law, Manori Pires. Ms. Ashraf spoke about how women need to be where decisions are being made about them. I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that in Sri Lanka, women don't have access to legal abortion except under life-saving circumstances. But illegal abortion services are rampantly available. These are unregulated and largely dangerous. We saw how the draft bill was brought to legalize abortion in instances of rape, incest and fetal abnormalities. However, this was largely opposed mainly by religious groups, by a bunch of clergymen. How absurd and insane is that? That a group of religious leaders oppose something as common sense based as this, where you're saying abortion will be legalized in instances of rape, incest and fetal abnormalities. How do you view this?
I think, Sonali, it's a pathetic state of affairs. I think the women has to have the right, if in the cases you mentioned, if it's rape, if you're a rape victim, and if there are serious medical like abnormalities in the fetus and incest, I think you should have the right. But also I think we need to create dialogue among people so that we can influence the religious leaders, because I think the society at large is also not aware the struggles that the women go through. If it's a rape victim, sometimes, you know, the women view, sometimes they put the blame on the woman and say, you know, the way you're dressed or the way you behave, you went out at night, so on and so forth. So sometimes the victim is victimized. So therefore, I think more dialogue, more awareness also has to be created about how the women feels and how dangerous it is for her life. I don't think people are aware of the statistics, like all these illegal clinics they have, how many women die over there. We don't have proper statistics, and I don't think the general public is also aware of how dangerous it is and the deaths that occur in these places. So I think if we create enough dialogue among people and among groups, I think we might be able to bring in some kind of reform, but I think it's still in the draft stage. So I think the law enforcing authorities also need to take decisions as to put it up to the Justice Ministry or take it from over there, without, you know, just letting the clergy or whatever decide the future of
Absolutely, and the brunt of this is borne mainly by women from less privileged backgrounds who have absolutely no recourse to resources, to information and knowledge.
Yes, and I think also the fear is there. They don't realize that it is only for limited circumstances like abnormalities, or if you're a rape victim, incest. People at large doesn't realize it is only on these limited circumstances that you're permitting abortion. They think that this might lead to, you know, that a woman will be given the right to abort. If you're pregnant, you have the right to abort. I think mainly people also fear that this might lead to that. So those fears also needs to be eradicated.
All right, thank you very much, Senior Attorney at Law, Ms. Manori Pires. I move my attention now to Bhumi Harendran, Executive Director, National Transgender Network, Sri Lanka. Bhumi, as an individual, you have faced a multitude of issues pertaining to passage, from obtaining your national identity card to various other issues that you faced by virtue of now identifying as a female. Take us through the challenges that you faced during this process, and also how you overcame them.
First of all, I really love challenges. So if somebody challenges me, I'll take it as a, you know, kind of a task of my life. When it's come to the identification, we are in a situation, we have to go through, I mean, somebody else, I mean, I have to take somebody else permission, somebody else concerns to say or like make others to realize that I am a woman. The self-identification, my concerns, yes, it's like taken but not taken to their attentions. So I mean, when if I'm talking about this struggle and the procedure that we had to go through, it was like really kind of a funny conversation that we had, and it was really sad and kind of felt pathetic that how some of government officials are still thinking and behaving. So what happened in 2015, no, before 2015, we hadn't a proper process of going through the gender reconstruction surgery process. The systems were not in places. It was like all over the places.
Right.
So due to that, a lot of trans women had to face discriminations, most of verbally, and some of trans men had to face harassments physically.
Right.
So I can remember one incident that when a trans woman went to a Grama Sevaka officer to collect the documents. So he have told her to like remove your clothes and prove that you are a woman. So when I heard this conversation, I thought like, I mean, the first thing which came to my mind, what is the definition of a woman? To become a woman, what kind of boxes that I have to tick? What kind of abilities that I have to have? What kind of capabilities that I have to have? So it's like always the identity should be proved. And you have to give like thousands of explanations that what kind of traumas that you have to go through and what kind of journeys that you are, I mean, in which stage you are right now, you are a pre-operation person or a post-operation person. I mean, what's the point?
Yeah.
Right? It's all about like human values. So one trans woman had a guts to go to a Human Rights Commission and made a complaint about that. And the complaint kind of took a long time, but after government changed, they took it as a concern and, had a few, had a small group discussion first with a few activists who were working on, gender equality. So what we suggested to the Human Rights Commission that this need to be a larger, this need to be happen in a larger conversation. So like please invite who have, power, who have kind of a decision-making power to the table. So they have invited the police department, Registrar General, Psychiatric Department, etc., etc. So while we are having this discussion, one particular person said, why don't you go through the third gender concept, which, like happening in other Asian countries like India and Pakistan. During that time, we didn't have much people who came out as gender neutral person or androgyny, so like with different gender identities at the moment that now we have. So like what we thought, we had to fight so hard at least to get this identity card, this identification, male or female. So what if we get another box? We had to fight from the beginning to every, to achieve, to, live a normal life, right, from the beginning.
From then to now, Bhumi, do you see a certain improvement in the status quo?
Not really. Somehow we managed to get a circular which approved from the Health Ministry and also the Registrar General Department. But there are some officers who are still not ready to accept it.
Right. So if I were to suggest that perhaps we need to, as a society, educate government officials, as in that needs to be done by the state, of course, that education has to be there, has to be put in place. You're saying that that's not there yet, right?
Yes, because I don't think there's an issue with the circular, but issues with the attitudes.
Right. So what we need is an attitudinal shift in society.
And actually, no, I think there should be a non-discrimination policy which everybody should follow. Because what I always believe, when you are coming to a service providing positions, you can't drag your dirty attitudes, bad attitudes towards it. You have to provide service no matter what the person who is there.
Technically, the right to equality and equal treatment is enshrined in the Constitution in Article 12. But yes, the implementation, of course, is a whole other issue. With that, I'd like to open the floor for questions from our journalists. Nadeem, let's start off with you.
Thank you, Sonali. So it's gentlemen first on Women's Day.
Yes.
Actually, my first question is for Ms. Ferial Ashraf, former minister. Ms. Ashraf, Sri Lanka has had women's political participation from the time of the first State Council with Ms. Adeline Molamure. But it has been stagnant and it has always been at a very low level, despite having a head of state and a head of government in Ms. Chandrika Bandaranaike and Ms. Rima Bandaranaike. What is stopping, what specifically in your experience is stopping women and not just women who are connected to political families, women in general, in the general populace? What is stopping women from taking on roles in representative democracy?
Nadeem, you are well known to pose very difficult questions, so I'm happy it was only this much for me. Anyway, what I feel is, I mean, it's a very difficult place out there politically, right? One thing is the system of elections that we have, where you are expected to get votes from a huge district, right? It's not an electorate like how we had long ago, right? So the area that you got to work on is pretty large. So when the area is pretty large, there's a lot of traveling involved, and then a lot of money involved, right? You got to have a lot of money to be able to, at least for yourself, to travel around, right? So, and then there is a question of how the opponent is treated, right? I mean, physical abuse, mental abuse, everything, right? You also get beaten at times, or they are ready to beat you unless you are able to stand against it, right? So with all that, women who are watching, right, find it very difficult to promote themselves. Like when you come out, the public has to know you. Now, though they talk about a relative of a politician being able to go into politics, and it's looked down upon, like, I mean, they don't consider it something very important, or like, well, it's valid, like, you know, it was just like a, almost like a ping amati or ping mantri or whatever. But the thing is, when there is a woman in the political scene already working with the husband or the father or the brother or whoever, she is identified by those people as somebody capable of being able to do something, because she gets involved with the people, right? She is there doing the work, and then she's meeting the people get to know her, and the people kind of understand that she is capable of, you know, doing something for them. So there is a trust that is built already. Whereas a newcomer, to go into that arena and introduce themselves, wanting to work for the people, not very easy, Nadeem. You know, it takes one thing, you got to have a huge support, and then there is, as I told you, there is a lot of financial commitment, and you know, a woman, she is generally more sensible of the genders, I think. So she has to think twice whether she wants to put in all what she has been saving or somebody else's money, and then what happens. Because once you spend so much money, then you should have a way of making that money. So all this put into play, right, makes it very difficult for the woman. And also, if you take the political parties that have to give nomination to people, right, they also look at it as, it's not a question of wanting the best man or the best woman there, but somebody who can bring in the vote, never mind who. So whether he is the person in charge of the tavern in town, or never mind, if he can bring in the vote, they are willing to hand over nominations to him. So the woman has to fight for it from the word go, because she won't even get the party, the head of party or the party hierarchy supporting her, unless she has already built up herself like being the wife of somebody, or the brother or the sister or the whatever. So otherwise,
what's the route to solving this? If
you know,
like if the electoral reforms that are needed, the campaign finance reforms that are needed, where can we expect this to come from? Should we be expecting it to come from within the political parties themselves?
I know. This is what I told you at the beginning itself. It's a question of awareness, right? Though we talk of politics being in Sri Lanka, etc., that we are aware of whatever, and as you know, politics is kind of weaved into the whole fabric of Sri Lanka. But how it has been woven in also is in a very negative sort of way. You know, politics is now looked at as totally being corrupt, right? And the slander and everything involved. who with, I mean, a sensible person to go in there will definitely look, I mean, think about it twice. And I think women are being very sensible. They don't want to go in there. So I feel, you know, the system of our electoral system, this district, right, selecting, not having a particular electorate for a candidate has to change, right? Then the financial aspect of it, controls over it, right? It is never done. We should have that. And of course, we got the quota system kind of halfway, right? I mean, it was not clearly done. So we should, at least to start with, we can ask the parties when they nominate, you know, we all have nominated MPs, and we could ask for a 50-50 in that nominated list, so that once the women go in there and they prove themselves, people will definitely want to vote them in again, but you've got to give them a chance.
Ms. Ashraf, since 2006, when the World Economic Forum introduced the Global Gender Gap Index, Sri Lanka, which was ranked 13th at the time, has tumbled 89 places as of the last year. We're now 102nd. Of course, this is due to a quirk in the calculation. But it's believed that, so it measures 4 indexes: economic participation, educational attainment, health, and also political participation. And it's believed that the low score in the political participation is what has contributed to the decline in Sri Lanka's rank. Do you agree with the position that women in Sri Lanka have in Sri Lankan politics, in the legislature, in government, in governance, is worse off today than it was in 2006?
No, I don't think it's worse off. I think women are now better aware of the situation. There are lots of programs going on, right, of, you know, training women. And I think we are getting there, right? But it's going to take a little time. It's going to be tough. But I'm very hopeful. I'm very optimistic.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ashraf. Bhumi, quick question for you. In recent years, we've seen an intersection of trans rights with women's rights and the feminist movement. And it's not always been, how shall we put it, a progressive and friendly relationship between these two movements. There is a growing call for feminist movements to be more trans inclusive. How do you view the feminist movement in Sri Lanka in terms of its inclusivity of trans people?
Honestly, I have a huge doubt about this so-called feminist movement in Sri Lanka, because it's very picky. And till up to 2018, I guess, if I'm not mistaken, trans women were not included in that movement. That's why I said, like, I personally have a problem with what is the definition of being a woman. And also the issues that they are raising up. And, you know, the movement is like a wave. Sometimes it's coming up suddenly, and suddenly it's like going, I don't know, it's like disappearing. So it's like the sustainability and continuity of the movement is like highly doubtable. And the inclusivity is like, I don't know, it's also like a climate, if I'm not mistaken, and as I believe, because it's like kept changing, and it's keep changing. And I honestly don't want to get involved in, because I really don't want to be in a place where are like so much confusions, because I'm very clear about like the path which I'm walking on, and too much cook going to spoil the soup. So yeah.
Bhumi, in 2016, trans people's political rights or political representation is also a key issue. The better representation you have, the better chance of having your voices heard. In 2016, we had the first transgender person appointed as governor of a province in the form of Miss Niluka Ekanayaka. How important, as a trans rights activist, how important is political representation to you?
I think it's really important, because like no matter who you are, the decisions are making for you. You're also a part of this society. So like when a person making decisions behalf of you, you also need to be counted in that platforms. I mean, like I always been in some such platforms. Sometimes we had a like really hard, tough time to get into the systems. Like let's say in where I am right now, I am a part of the HIV prevention program in Sri Lanka, which doing with the government. There are so many arguments going on, like when it's come to the inclusivity, right? You have to keep, I mean, you will become a bad person, a black sheep, because like you always questioning. And sometimes I have been questioned like, why are you so fussy? Why you want to be in all platforms? So that's the questions that they're always throwing to us. So I'm saying, obviously, you are getting funds to work for us, but you are making decisions for us, without us. So nothing for us, without us. So that's why I always, you know, like now I'm kind of tired being in all platforms as a single person. So I'm just trying to get more, you know, people in. And yes, it's really important, but like I'm a high doubt. Like, let's say a woman in parliament, what kind of a verbal abuses that she had to face, right? She's a mother, she's a sister of someone, she's a, you know, daughter of someone. But like she's being naked in front of like a lot of men inside the parliament. So just think, a trans woman going in, I don't know what kind of things will be happen to her.
Thank you.
Or,
Thank you for your
just
response.
very quick question for Ms. Manori Pierce, if I may. Ms. Pierce, a lot has been said in the recent past as well about the plight of women lawyers in this country as well. You know, recently, we know that steps were taken to reform what many consider to be an archaic dress code. We've seen instances in the past where even during the impeachment of the former Chief Justice, Ms. Shirani Bandaranaike, about things that were said by MPs on that committee in efforts to undermine. Are you happy with the current state of affairs when it comes to women in the legal profession?
You're not only referring to the dress code, I understand. Yeah, we are trying to revise the dress code. I mean, but it's a very slow process. There has been some progress made, but I think that will soon happen. No, we are not happy. If you take the male-female ratio, more women, more girls pass out into the legal field as attorneys at law in comparison to their male counterparts. But as you go higher up in the unofficial bar, they are severely not represented. They are underrepresented. They are severely underrepresented in the high ranks in the unofficial bar. If you take the President's Council, we have less than 5 female President's Council as at to date. And we have more than 100 if you take the male President's Council. So you can imagine the disparity. I think one reason is also there is no work-life balance. I mean, if you take, I think in the official bar, it's nice to see a lot of females are now applying to as judicial officers, so that is a very positive sign. But if you take the unofficial bar, counsels work very late. Sometimes it's about 8:30, 9, or maybe 10 o'clock. So if you're a young lawyer, young female lawyer with small children to take care of, then it becomes impossible. So there has to be some balance that has to be created. So I feel this struggle, it is not only women, it's a women's struggle, but we can't win it alone without men taking part in it. If we don't, if the gender justice can only be done if men also support the women. If this is, most people when we talk of feminism feel that it is a fight against the men. It is definitely not. Men has to be part and parcel of this gender justice. Then only we can achieve what we are going to achieve. So I think most of the time, if you take the junior end, you find a lot of females in the legal profession. But as you go higher up, they are severely underrepresented.
Manori, when you look at the gender gap in the legal profession in terms of representation higher up in the hierarchy, you begin to question the role of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka as the organization that represents the interests of not just men but also women in the legal profession. Throughout its existence, if you were to assess how the Bar Association of Sri Lanka has acted in promoting women's rights, the rights of women's lawyers, and providing a more conducive environment for women's lawyers, what would that assessment be? Are you satisfied?
No, I can't say so. I don't think the Bar Association has prominently played a role in this, in bridging the gender equality as such. I think Bar Association alone cannot do that, I feel. It is, I think, everybody, especially the councils, the males, especially the males, have to make that shift. Because they need to create a work environment that is conducive for young women to work. And also we are talking of advancement in technology. You don't need to be in office to conduct a consultation anymore. You can have a Zoom meeting with a client from home. You can work from home. So I think the COVID-19 also has given us so many examples where you don't need to be in an office to work. So I think those changes need to be made. So the women, I think the work environment has to be made conducive for the women to work. Say if you're having childcare responsibilities. So all this has to be looked into.
Right, thank you very much. I'd also like to introduce Azra Asan, our third journalist joining us this evening. Good evening, Azra.
Good evening,
let's start off with you.
Yes, I would like to pose my first question to Dr. Priyanjali. Mrs. Spirius mentioned about work-life balance, but at this time, sometimes it is not even an option. Here itself, we have 7 women past 10:30 still here outside and not at homes taking care of our children or the husbands. So how does it work? It's either, there's always the option of either you be fully into your profession or you restrict yourself to the house and take care of the babies. There's no middle ground there. How can we move forward in this context?
I think, Azra, like when you say work-life balance, that term itself is questionable because work is a part of life as well. So it's keeping life in balance with every other facet of life. So one facet would be your spiritual development, your friendships, your work, your leisure, your entertainment, etc. So I think we can't, it's an individual choice, isn't it? What emphasis you want to make on what part of that entire system. So one woman might think, well, I really want to progress on my work area. But another woman might think, I would love to be with my children. Another woman might think, I'd like to be a homemaker. Or I would like to do my, my little home business. So first of all, it's actually that work-life balance itself, the concept is now questioned. Second is that it is an individual choice. Then within that individual choice, a woman who thinks, I have the capacity, the potential and the interest to really grow in my career. For those women, really it is not easy because particularly in countries like ours, the systems are non-existent literally to hold them and to support them. Like if you look at most Western nations, there would be social support systems like childcare, etc., which the woman could rely on as she does her thing. There will be also their male partners who would chip in. For example, maternity leave for a man. Now those systems are not available in our country. So even if the man is willing to chip in, the systems aren't available. So we need to create those systems too to facilitate that woman who likes to progress in their career. So there's a lot of things that needs to come together to help this woman, But not all women would want that.
Yeah, it's a choice. Mrs. Ashraf, I would, there's this misunderstanding in the society that when it comes to Muslim girls or Muslim women, you're somewhat restricted from your family background. But personally, as someone who comes from an all-girl Muslim school, I know the kind of potential they have within the school and how much they can achieve in life. Why do we still think, even in this day and age, why do we still think that the Muslim girl or the Muslim woman is restricted to a certain extent?
I guess because they were restricted once upon a time.
Are we still restricted?
Right? They had to be, right? Even when you talk about education, there was a time when the Muslim girls didn't go in for education like how they are now, right? So it's a change of attitude, like how they understand the teachings of Islam. You know, when that was a question Sonali asked and I didn't even respond to it. She asked me how it was for a Muslim woman to come into politics. It was tough, right? There was a lot of criticism. And then if you ask me the question, okay, what did you do about it? I just ignored, right? I ignored because I felt very confident that I knew what I was doing. I wasn't doing anything against the teachings of my religion. And I had the support of my family. And though my husband was not around, I knew if he had been around, he would have supported me. Kind of confidence, you know. And that helped me to go ahead, right? I never responded to any of the criticisms that were made about me being a woman. I never went in to explain to people why a woman can or cannot do whatever. Because there's no point, because this is you know, these are the myths in society. And it's very sad, even to this date, we have the highly educated ones still wanting to bring back the freedom that could be given to a woman. I mean, it's almost like it belongs to the man and he has to give it to the woman. No, it's not like the woman has the freedom to do whatever. When you take the Muslim Marriages and Divorce Act, you know, we are having a huge problem in trying to convince the men that we are not trying to change the teachings of the Holy Quran, but we are talking about problems that the woman faces. It's very difficult because we come from a setup where certain things have been put into us and that is being treated as religion. So getting them to rethink, relearn, not easy. And our system of education also, I think, doesn't help very much, right? Because we learn a lot, we know everything, but to put it into practice, like I think our children have not been given that opportunity to think, like, other than what is being taught. So all this put together, I think, listening to what the professor was saying about the, you know, the changes that are required. I think it's a whole society that has to start working towards all this. All four of us, what we are saying is that we need awareness, right, of the problems. Especially the women need to know the constraints that are there, that should not be there, right? And to break, you know, them and come out is going to take time, but as I said earlier, I am very optimistic.
But Bhumi, one last question. But Bhumi, not everyone has the strength or the willpower to do this. You were exceptional, all four of you are. Exceptional to stand against the conventional way of doing things. And here we are. But not everyone can afford that kind of lifestyle or the strength. What's your message?
I think it's lack of opportunities. I mean, like we had a conversation about behaviors of trans women and men in the society. People like always pointing like trans women don't know how to behave. Do we have such a ways to educate them how to behave? I mean, do they have opportunities to learn about the life? Do they have opportunities to gain skills? It's always about like questioning what you have in between legs, but not what you can do, what you are capable enough to do. So it's about, like, as ma'am said and other professors and other lawyers said, it's about like lack of awareness, lack of opportunities. If there are opportunities and chances of, you know, getting, I mean, you know, develop yourself to help to gain your skills, to develop it, people might have been, having a good life more than this, especially women. And when actually I forgot to tell, like when he was asking about like how important trans representatives in politics, it's also about opportunity, you know.
But we have less women representation, so I don't know how long it will take for us to go there.
Yeah, because it's of the, like if, let's say, a woman who don't have a powerful background, just imagine like how kind of traumas that she have to go through and what kind of mental abuse that she had to face. Even for a woman in, I mean, just think about like, I mean, we are talking about development. How much representation that we have in development sectors. I mean, what kind of pathetic challenges that a woman have to go through. Sexual bribes and verbal abuse, right? So like going to a top level, it's really questionable. It's highly questionable. Just think about like recent recruitment of a police woman in a high position. How much question that she had to answer, and what kind of challenges that she had to face. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of a jealousy or like a, I don't know what's the problem, but it's really challengeable. It's a lack of, just because of lack of opportunities.
My question is based on violence against women, and it's to Professor Priyanjali. You did a study in 2007 where you focused on 6 main beliefs regarding a wife beating among university students, and these included justification of wife beating, the belief that women would benefit from beating, and the belief that women are responsible for being beaten. And the results were quite concerning. I'd say between 7.2% and 33.4% of the participants expressed some level of agreement that a wife beating is justified. Then between 14 to 24% of the students agreed that a woman benefit from being beaten. Could you explain as to why anyone would in fact agree to justify inflicting physical violence against women? Is it because of the patriarchal social structure of our country where we focus so much on women and marriage?
Yeah, so this study was done about 10-12 years ago, Pavani, and it was on university students. So now they may be like 30-year-olds, those students now. And so there were what's concerning is that this spectrum who took part in the study would be the so-called educated people. So which means that they had exposure to what's happening in the world as well. And they held these beliefs. So the reason why they may be holding these beliefs would be, yes, one thing is the patriarchal nature of our society. And mind you, this study, even the females had similar views as men. There was no significant statistical difference about wife beating and its benefits amongst females and males. And that is really concerning. Because women also believe that a certain amount of physical reprimands is useful to get the woman in check. So the reason is, yes, patriarchal societies where intergenerationally the thought that women would benefit from a physical spanking has been given down. And the problem is women themselves don't question it. So that is why we see in certain communities where when a woman is hit, the other women don't come to protect that woman. And mind you, in this study we found out what are the reasons that they say the woman should be hit is things like not doing the household work, not giving enough sex to the man, not being kind to the mother-in-law. So you see, so it's like really these kind of reasons. So yes, a patriarchal society is one significant reason that people hold these very strong attitudes.
So we have had the transformation of thoughts for a long time, and you said these people would be around 30 years of age. Do you think there's any hope that they would have changed their attitude?
So they would be like now, like late 30s kind of thing. The only way we can change attitudes, number one, is through legal reform. So that's what they have seen. So however much we do public awareness on any matter, whether it's violence or whatever, what research has shown is if a country do not bring in laws, because the law itself is an awareness. It's like wearing helmets. Until the law was brought that you have to wear helmets, people didn't, even for their own safety they didn't. But whenever the law came, it brings about awareness. So a legal reform is really important. But of course, we have legal reforms for these things. Then comes huge public awareness campaigns on the difficulties associated with having these views. We haven't seen that happening. Huge public awareness campaigns on violence against women haven't been done that much. There are very committed organizations, agencies and people doing it, but it is not sufficient. It has to be at a national level, consistently, across many years. Then only people's attitudes will shift, where one generation will totally flip. Then only change will happen. And it hasn't happened that much.
Right, thank you very much. We're discussing the challenges, obstacles faced with respect to the advancement of women's rights, specifically in Sri Lanka. We go in for a short commercial break. We'll be right back. You're watching Face the Nation. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. We're in discussion with Professor Pianjali de Souza, Ms. Ferial Ashraf, Ms. Manori Piris and Ms. Bhumi Harendran. This is our special International Women's Day program on Face the Nation. My first question in this round is to Professor Pianjali de Souza. When we talk about being a woman, it's commonly known that women must be soft-spoken and ladylike and kind and nurturing. Where are these words and concepts emanating from? And I mean, how do we respond to these in the 21st century?
I think, Sonali, it may be emanating from these fairy tales, isn't it? It's like, it's the masculine, feminine, gender thing, which is a stereotype. There's a stereotype. We have, for example, we have a stereotype of a mother, isn't it? A mother may not fit into that stereotype, but we have a stereotype. We even have a stereotype of what a mother's body should look like, a little rounded, etc. So these are just societal stereotypes that have been brought on from generation to generation.
And these stereotypes we see reflected in school textbooks. For example, if you take the national syllabuses, you have the mother cooking in the kitchen and the father going to work, or the mother setting the table for the father and the male children to eat, while the daughter also helps out with the kitchen chores. I mean, how is this still okay?
Because I think the people who do these kinds of textbooks, for example, in this case, are so unconsciously committed to these stereotypes. I feel that they don't even realize they're doing it. You see, it's like you would have an advertisement where the little boy is playing with cars and the girls are playing with dolls. But of course, Sonali, having said that, there is research have shown in child psychology that there is an inclination for little girls to be drawn to girly things. There's a high tendency for that.
Right.
So it's not
for the
that
majority, not all.
No.
Yes.
So majority is there. So I think it's that factor. Then the fact that, you know, intergenerationally this concept, then fairy tales, you know, all of these things have come together to have this image of a typical man and a typical woman. Right. You see.
How do we break free from these stereotypes, which are damaging, to be frank?
Yeah, because by having these stereotypes, you may be calling for things like violence. That's the problem. Because you have these, like what we were discussing during the break, is that when you have a very masculine stereotype, you could also associate toxic masculinity to it, which is when you're a man, you can be aggressive. you can shout at a woman. Those things are also associated, which leads to a lot of problems. Now, to break stereotypes is very, very difficult. There's an entire subject in psychology called social psychology that talks about stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. So breaking stereotypes takes a long time. And again, laws about it is very essential. That's how stereotypes about racial differences, skin color, things have changed in other countries because they brought in laws that you can't do this. But of course, in this context, we can't do that, isn't it? We can't bring a law about, being a feminine or a masculine person. So I think it's all of us being open-minded about things that we are not usually open-minded about, and not necessarily about gender stereotypes, but other things also. Being open to people's diversity and accepting it, that is what is required. But it's easier said than done. For many people, it's very difficult to be open.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Ms. Farial Ashraf, I'd like to move my attention to you. When we speak of diversity, inclusivity, and acceptance as a society, Sri Lankans tend to be rather backward when it comes to accepting certain certain things. For example, in Sri Lanka, homosexuality is still criminalized. Abortion is still illegal. Prostitution is illegal. However, we see these being perpetuated across the island. Nevertheless, however, the root causes of problems are not addressed, and the state largely tends to sort of show a blind eye to these kinds of issues. When we speak about inclusivity, diversity, and women's rights, where are we missing the point?
If I may say so, I think we have a tendency as a nation to live the lie, right? I don't know, I believe in this, right? Because generally, I mean, one little example, if I can give you, when I used to speak to my constituents in Ampara, I used to tell them, like, these are the things I spoke on stage, and that's why I'm here now. Anyway, I used to tell them, when a mother is taking her children to visit somebody, right, and she dresses them up, little children, and she tells them, එක විස්කෝතුවකට වැඩිය ගන්න එපා. ඒ කියන්නේ එතනට ගිහිල්ලා ඒගොල්ලෝ විස්කෝතු දුන්නොත් එකයි ගන්නේ දෙක තුන ගන්නෙ නෑ. මොකද දෙක තුන ගත්තොත් if you take 2 or 3, they might think that I have not fed you enough, or that you have never seen a biscuit, and which is, infra-dig for me. So it starts from there, no? Everything is a pretense. Like, you're hungry, but you don't want to, you are telling your child, no, don't jump at it, because you'll be considered greedy, right? I mean, the child is hungry, right? But the child is told. So I think the lie starts from there, right? You tend to cover up, because you think, I mean, one example I used to tell them, in the village, if there is they hear of a person who has died, no, they hear there is going to be a funeral in a house. Oh, they all rush, right? They all sit there and they cry, and they would run back to their homes and bring whatever they have, sugar, rice, whatever, and help in this setup where there is a funeral and we want to be helpful. And they're all part of this whole village, right? But at the same time, and now for a funeral, you don't have to even send a message, right? They get to know and they'll come. Say, for instance, a child is getting married in a home, and they also get to know. But they'll wait for an invitation. And then they will say, "Mapita kiuwe ne, ehinda api yanne ne," right? They don't want to go there. They don't want to run with the rice they have, or the flour they have, or the sugar they have. Why? Why is that? It's the same thing, right? You have to help people, right? You hear of a child of another family who has done very well in exams, you wouldn't want to go say, hey, well done, congratulations. It's not part of our culture. But in case that child has come down, has failed, you see the mother or the father wherever and you say, Ane aparadane, your child failed now. How do you explain all this? These are very common things in our culture. You will not rush in to enjoy success of another. But when there is a failure, somebody is ill, somebody is dying, somebody is whatever, you are there to help. How come? What's this big difference between sharing joy and sharing a moment of sadness? So these are ingrained in us. We have been brought up like this. So as Professor said, it's time we started talking about all this. Bring about awareness. When I used to talk to my constituent, like very, villagers, they used to enjoy it because then when I tell them, they used to look down, the mothers, and they say, yes, we say that. Why do you say that? If there is somebody who is willing to give, why do you not take it? It's because that's why I say you're trained to live the lie.
Right.
So it's like that wherever, whether it is homosexuality, you have a homosexual, a son who is a homosexual, you will be like kind of, ostracized. You will not be accepted in society. So the whole family suffers. The father, the mother, the children, everybody suffers because he has not come in within those terms that we have made for ourselves. So these are all frames that we have made for our own selves. Not that somebody made it. We are also very comfortable within there. So to break and then come out, you've got to be talking about it.
Ms. Ashraf, how must the policymakers engage in this process of breaking stereotypes?
See, very unfortunately, we have a 5-year period in Parliament, right? So whoever who's coming there is coming with a lot of hope, wanting to do whatever. So by the time you finish arguing the matters and whatever, 3 years are gone, 2 years more. Yeah. So then the last 2 years you are very busy trying your best to keep, retain your seat for the next election because you have not achieved much.
But surely there are policymakers who are genuinely passionate about...
Correct, but they're a minority, right? You see how development has been brought into our system of politics, right? Why should a politician get involved in development? Tell me that. When you want something, you want a bridge in that area, you want a...
Officers, maybe the male officers are not trained in that area, so training should be given. So all that also needs funding, I think.
Ms. Pierce, isn't it common sense that police officers need to be given, specifically police officers need to be given gender sensitization training? That funding, budgetary allocations need to be made towards these kinds of issues which are rampant across the country.
But don't we have a women's desk in most of the police stations?
Exactly. Now? Ideally, it's a women's desk that handles women's complaints.
Yes. And also, there's a specific date in each and every police station that they do trainings, such a trainings. Yeah. So, like, I have been invited for like some stations in Tuesdays or Wednesdays that they do trainings. Yeah. But so, like, it's just a matter of like including what you need to be trained. I think
but what Sonali says happens most of the time. Now, I have a helper at home. When she was abused, what the police says, no, you have been married for so many years, yes. You have an older son, why don't you go back and patch it up? That is the common attitude of the police generally.
And also like how much that we are ready to accept it. It's no matter of like giving trainings, like how much that we are ready to accept.
It has to be a change in attitude also, and more dialogue has to be created, I think, on this problem.
And the normalization of violence against women is something that I've personally tried to grapple with. It's so normalized. Yeah, you can beat up a woman and get away with it. It's such a commonplace thing. And specifically when it comes to women from underprivileged backgrounds, it's almost a part of nature for them.
We have a woman in a suitcase also now.
Also, I think women also need to stand up. I think they also need to be aware, they need to be more educated. I think also if it can be incorporated into the school education system, where to say if this happens, this is definitely not the norm.
Absolutely.
This is abuse. You need to stand up against this. So that I think has to be ingrained into the school children itself. You cannot accept this. So I think there should be more awareness also created.
Precisely.
There are
Thank you very
restrictions
much.
of, in education. That's what some people try to bring through the comprehensive sex education, but like the people who are in those chairs who make decisions, what children should learn, just like threw it away. But it's the comprehensive sex education means not only having sex, it's about how respecting another human being. It's about like how you should protect your body and how you should respect other bodies. So like the education, I think also we can't change elders. We can only give informations to elders. Truly, I believe, because like no matter what kind of trainings that you give, sensitizing workshops that you give, you have to show like more sadness to make them aware that okay, this is a real issue. Right, you have to cry, you have to, like show the wounds and stuff to make them realize, oh, this is a real serious issue. Right, I think like we need to provide information to elders and like create such a strong laws, which is like truly protects citizens in Sri Lanka, and we need to start educate children, because that's the route which we can change, that we can module. Isn't it?
Absolutely, Bhumi.
Yes.
You have done a lot of work surrounding discrimination faced by women and the transgender community in Sri Lanka. Speak to us about some of the key issues that you focused your attention on, which you were also able to resolve to a certain extent.
It's kind of easy to not solve, but kind of manage the situation which is happening in government sectors. But let's say it's really hard to address the violence that face in families. Like
behind closed doors.
Yes, because like this is a really dangerous and kind of a pathetic situation that we have heard so many cases. A trans man who born as a biological woman and try to change himself as a man. So maybe he's getting raped by his father to correct him, right? Like the concept always coming in, having sex with a man will be correct you as a woman, right? So the own brother or like brother's friends or father's friends are trying to rape them, abuse them to correct them, right? So it's really hard to tackle that kind of issues, because like sometimes kids are scared to come out and tell about this. And also as I said, like it's really hard to change the attitudes, because that they think they own that. Just because I'm a doctor, I have right to decide that whether I'm going to provide this service to this particular person or not. I'll give you one example, like how pathetic and disgraceful people bringing their bad attitudes and opinions to these service providing sectors. So one person, I'm not going to mention the hospital and the doctors and the ward. So that person wanted to get a surgery date, right? The head of that clinic is very sensitive. he's a very supportive doctor. He's the best example I can give for a professional doctor who have filled with human feelings in his heart. So like there were like 3 doctors, 1 male doctor and 2 females. They were continuously telling to that trans man, you are insulting to your school, what's wrong with you, and just try to have a sex with a person who have a big male organ. You will enjoy it and you will become a woman. How professional for you to say this and that to do rather than providing the service, right? So this is the things that you know, like when we are trying to talk about this identity cards, when we are talking about that, no, we need the female or male identification. One person from the police department said, oh, then we will put a significant icon on your identity card. I was like, why? No, the features wise, the shape wise, you will be different, and you know, like to identify you are a trans one or not. I was like, why? Why you need to put label on people? We at least, I mean, for me, I just ask this identification to live peacefully, because I'm kind of tired of telling that I'm a woman, I have gone through this, I'm taking hormones and this and that. I can't keep telling that. So like showing this, I can at least say, listen, I'm a woman, shut up. Right? So it's like really hard to change the attitudes. I don't know, like what we can do for that.
There's this one personal experience that I had when it comes to court cases that try perpetrators who harass women and girls. When I went to Jaffna for Vidya's court case, they was about to give the final verdict on the court case. I saw how the number of, I spoke to the mother with my broken Tamil, and she told me the number of times she was brought before courts or the number of times she was brought before authorities to explain over and over again what happened to her daughter. So on one side, it takes a long time for someone to be accused of a certain crime, and on the other hand, they have to constantly keep reminding or telling them over and over again what the daughter, in this particular case, what the daughter had to go through. So on the day the final verdict was about to give, and I was within the court premises, I saw that Vidya's mother fainted twice within the premises because she couldn't deal with the mental trauma or the agony. Why can't we change this?
Yes, I think there are so many fields, so many areas where law reforms are needed. Sometimes if you take a partition case or a land matter, it sometimes drags on for about 15 years, right? So there are so many areas, not only in where a rape victim is concerned, but there are so many other areas where law reforms are urgently needed. But I think the Justice Minister has appointed several people. I think they are trying to expedite this matter, but it's not only where that field, but there are so many other fields where where murder is concerned, criminal cases are concerned. Sometimes the accused is punished only after 20 years after the trial date has started. Sometimes he has got married, he has children, and then he is sent to prison. So all that really needs change. I think the law-making authorities really need to look at all these areas and do the reforms in an urgent matter, but I think it has been long overdue, because I think the politicians, they are engaged in all other, I think, other things rather
Sometimes the people's well-being is not their top priority.
Not their top priority. That is correct.
It's frustrating, Mrs. Pires.
Also, I think where sexual abuse is also concerned, the victim needs to identify the perpetrator. So there are also certain, I mean, the proper structures are not in place. Sometimes you're kept
in front of the victim a row of men and you need to identify, those are not actually very suitable procedures. I think those procedures need to change, but it will take time.
Mrs. Ashraf, speaking about women living in rural Sri Lanka, when compared to them, when compared to the life that we have here in Colombo, we get to enjoy certain privileges because of the, let's say, the education level or the family backgrounds that we have. But I'm sure you have plenty of experience about women in rural Sri Lanka. Sometimes they can't even afford their day-to-day activities or the meals, or their next top priority is to feed the children. So in that case, they might completely forget about themselves and they won't be able to defend themselves if someone tries to take advantage. So when will we improve from that aspect as well? Because it seems like whoever is living in these developed areas, they have the mental capability or the ability to think, yeah, this is right and this is wrong. But in rural Sri Lanka, when we went to those houses, we saw that they don't really bother about themselves. Their main objective is survival. So how do we, for someone who has been in the political sphere and who has worked with the people on the ground level, how can we move forward from that position?
Yeah, I don't see it as so bad, right? I mean, thanks to our system of education and so on, there is a bit of, there is some kind of awareness, and especially in the rural areas, you know, there is a way of life for them, how they look after each other, right? And the availability of, you know, our famous the jackfruit tree and so on and so forth, the, you know, the garden produce and all that, they kind of manage. Of course, there is ample poverty, but I wouldn't call it, compared to the city, that it's something really bad. Like sometimes they are better off than some other poorer segments of the city. Right? If you take the Colombo city and where you find the shanties and so on, some of the villages are in a better state, right? So, as I told you earlier, it's all about, you know, the people wanting to change. Like the Holy Quran says, until you decide that you want a change, God is not going to bring about the change. So same way, until we decide that we want a change, the state is not going to change for us. So it's a question of the people getting aware of whatever, being educated. I mean, instead of the word education, I would say awareness, right? Because education is kind of all accepted in Sri Lanka. I don't want to talk about that, but there is plenty of awareness that is required on all these various topics. And I hope the educated young of Sri Lanka would join in to bring about awareness amongst our people. I mean, otherwise, it's going to take a very, very long time for us to move forward. But let's not lose hope.
So you also need some drive from the people in power, right? I mean, for the first time in a very long time, there is no cabinet portfolio on women's affairs. There's only one woman in cabinet. There's 12 women in parliament, less than the previous two parliaments. And of the 12, 4 are from the national list. They're not even elected from the electorates or from the electoral districts. In this backdrop, when there is, at least the circumstantial evidence seems to indicate that there is a clear lack of commitment on the part of the governing authorities to address these issues, what is it that ordinary people can do?
Yeah, that's what I told you. I referred to not only the governing authorities, but also the leaders of political parties, how they view the situation of women and what a lot of importance they give. Because we don't have it in us, right? It's a very It's a patriarchal society. We have been used to certain things. It's very difficult for us to come out of it. Now, even if you take the ethnic issue in Sri Lanka, we've had enough and more problems. So, and there are lots of little groups working all over trying to get people to work together. But until the government, the state decides that this is a priority, we want this done, it wouldn't happen. So even for the state to decide on matters like that, the people who get involved with the state have to think likewise, right? So it's a question of bringing all these forces together. Now, right now, you know, we have this, you know, the parliament and the presidential system. Parliament becomes more or less of a talk shop only because they are not the decision makers. It's a presidential system, so all complicated there. Right? So we need reforms in all this. Now, earlier, in the good old days, when they went to Parliament and when they put out their cases, well, something happens. But now, not necessarily so. Somebody else will have to decide whether this is happening or otherwise. So, I mean, a lot of changes are required. And for the changes to take place, we have to have people in place. So they are very busy because in case they are ousted, then again, back again change, and then we go on with changes.
Professor Pianjali, we spoke about the global gender gap index earlier, and the only indicator where Sri Lanka has sort of parity between males and females is in educational attainment, at least in, as Ms. Manori referred to. For example, there's a higher percentage of women passing out as lawyers than there are men. Similarly, even in STEM, in science, technology, engineering, medicine, in many other disciplines as well, at the education level at least, even though they're not represented in the hierarchy, we see women outperforming more often than not their male counterparts. Still, despite all of their education, as maybe which is why Ms. Ashraf is doesn't want to refer to it as education, we still find that it's very difficult to change these mindsets amongst the people, both men and women. Do you fear, given that we've been stagnant on this index, is essentially stagnant for over a decade now, do you fear that these mindsets have become so entrenched that it cannot be changed anymore?
I fear, but I'm hopeful things could change, because if you don't hope, I think it's a lost cause, unfortunately. Education is theoretical knowledge, and that is not wisdom. We need to have a society that has emotional intelligence. What we have is education system, spare me for this, but I have to say this, where we memorize facts and we write it at exams, but we are not making humans. For that we need what we call emotional intelligence, good humans with good human values. Unfortunately, I feel that we are way behind that. Countries like Singapore actually give children these humane values. So you are educated, you have a bunch of knowledge which you have learned from a textbook where you can go out and do a job with, but you also have patience, kindness, open-mindedness. If you don't have that second bunch, which we call as mental health and emotional intelligence, I think we will be a lost cause. But I like to be hopeful, because if there's no hope, it's going to be a sad plight, isn't it?
Professor, sometimes one can feel that women lack the clout to govern discussions. Perhaps the only reason why within a one-year period of a global pandemic we actually have vaccines is because this issue affects both women and men. For example, there are billions of dollars to treat erectile dysfunction, but sparse research allocation for female contraceptives or period cramps. How do you view this?
Is it about the fact that if it's to do with women, funding would be less, is it? I think with the pandemic, it has affected the whole world, which includes all genders, all races, all religions. So people got together. But I mean, personally, Sonali, I think giving a blanket statement may not be the real picture, but we do realize, now for example, if you take education, as you very rightfully said, opportunities have been created for women to come online. So there are more girls in schools, there are more females at universities across many sectors. However, if you leave the funding factor out, I feel it's more to do with society and their attitudes and opportunities and limitations that the society has created for us. People pulling us down, like the crab, you know, when the crab tries to get out of whatever little container, the other crabs pull them down. And in the women's case, it's not only the male crabs, it's also the female crabs.
Yes.
You see?
Yeah, we have time for one more question. Pavani?
Let's talk about the impact of COVID-19 and women in workforce. 1 year later since the COVID-19 pandemic, according to global data, 5.4 million women have lost their jobs since February last year, and over 2.1 million women have disappeared from the workforce entirely. So how do you, it's an open question, so how do you suggest that we address this issue with regard to Sri Lanka? Post COVID-19, how do we address the issue of women in workforce? Mrs. Ashraf, if you could start as the political.
That's been a very common issue, right? I mean, it's a global issue. And I guess we only have to hope and pray that this pandemic comes to an end and then we get back to wherever we were. But I also hope that the pandemic has taught us a lot of lessons, right? How the pandemic came on us, right? It didn't have race, color, gender, nothing. I mean, I guess God decided unless it's something like that, we will still be divided. So at least on that we were together. So hope and pray that this will come to an end now that we have been vaccinated also, and very soon start working towards the progress of the country, hopefully.
You're watching Face the Nation. We're discussing the challenges faced by women, going beyond the tokenism, celebrating the resilience of Sri Lanka's 52%. We go in for our final break. We'll be right back with the final round. Stay with us. Protecting women is not just the responsibility of other women, but also of the men and of a society at large. Protecting women means protecting Muslim women, Tamil women, educated women, poor women, rich women, disabled women, trans women. This intersectionality has to be maintained. This is the final round on this edition of Face the Nation. I'd like to ask our respected guests this question. We need dramatic social, societal transformation, and you are all believers that hope is possible, that positive change is possible. Ms. Manori Peiris, I'd like to start off this round with you. How must Sri Lanka now gear itself towards legal transformation in order to advance the rights of women in Sri Lanka?
I think change is happening. You can't say, Sonali, that change is not happening. We are in the same position as we were 10 years or 15 years back. Change is happening, but the problem is it is slow. But definitely change is happening. You see more females entering profession, and you see they talk more of their rights, and they talk of work-life balances. They talk of wage disparities. So I don't think change is not happening. Change is happening. I think we signed that ILO convention recently, a few years back. So wage disparities is illegal. So therefore change is happening, but it is slow. So I think we have hope.
Thank you very much. I move my attention now to Bhumi Harendran. She is the Executive Director of the National Transgender Network in Sri Lanka. Bhumi, earlier on in the show, we spoke about the intersectionality between the feminist movement and the transgender movement in Sri Lanka. But without making it too technical for our viewers, I'd like to pose a very simple question to you in terms of creating societal transformation, in terms of awareness, raising awareness among society on the one hand, and the government sector. How must this be done comprehensively?
I think there are some policies, there are some laws, but how much have we questioned that whether it's happening or not, whether it's like functioning or not? I think without questioning the governments or authorized parties all the time, I think it's also our responsibility to work on it. Like, we can't expect someone else to keep our rights and protection on a silver plate and, present to us. If something I feel wrong, I should stand myself. I think we also have it's a 50-50 responsibilities, right? We are the one who sending politicians into the parliament to make decisions behalf of us.
Yes.
So we also have a responsibility to check on them, whether they are doing their duties or not. Otherwise, it's your responsibility as a citizen in Sri Lanka to question. I don't know how you're going to do it, but somehow stand for it. You have to be brave enough without always being a victim of violence or whatever happening just due to anything it can be a power, it can be dynamic systems, whatever.
So you're saying it's an individual sort of attitudinal shift within oneself, where you think, yes, I need to question why this person is not acting towards my betterment.
Yes. If you need a change, you have to be the change. If you can't stand for it, then you have to change yourself to accept it. Whatever happens to you, okay, fine, I accept it and this is my life. I'm going ahead with that, sorry. So if you're expecting a change, you have to work for it. You have to be the change. Otherwise, it won't, I believe that it won't happen. If you believe on something, if you have a hope on something, you have to work on that.
Ms. Ashraf, Bhumi spoke about the critical, aware attitude of the individual citizen who can collectively then, a group of knowledgeable citizens can question their policymakers. My question to you is, how must policymakers converge with other stakeholders, the private sector, the development sector, and society at large, to create positive change and societal transformation?
Well, for all purposes, yes, they all work together. But as I told you, a parliamentarian is basically involved in the development of the constituency from which he was elected. That is how the present day parliamentarian is made to work. It's hardly a time for the parliamentarian to even get ready with participating in a debate with regard to legislation. Right? Sometimes I think the parliamentarian forgets that his role is lawmaking and not looking at the development of his constituency. So it's a mindset that has been made. So there are a few people who will be involved in the legislative part, and the others are left out because they are looking at the roads and the bridges and whatever that needs to be done. So to bring about all this, again, I come back to that same situation of awareness. But I would say, even though we are talking about all this on International Women's Day, I think the basic thing that has to be told to the people of this country, as we are talking about progress of Mother Lanka. Right? When I refer to Mother Lanka, I'm referring to the female part, again, Mother Lanka she becomes, right? It's a collective effort to see that we move forward as a nation, right? And for that, you've got to recognize that it's a joint effort, both the men, the women, never mind the sectors, get together, right? Start looking back as to why we have not been able to achieve much, though those around us have gone past, beyond us, right? So what is it that is dragging us? I mean, I don't think we give a lot of time to think of all that. So if we can start talking and getting people to think about all this, I think it's going to be very positive for us. And as I told you earlier, I am very optimistic.
Thank you very much. And optimism indeed is required. My final question is to Professor Pianjali de Souza. Professor, you're a professor in clinical psychology at the Department of Psychiatry, Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo. Mental health is something that we trivialize as Sri Lankans. If we are wounded, we seek medical care, but if we have psychological wounds, we ignore it, whether it be a man or a woman. And there is so much stigma about seeking mental health care. How must these attitudes shift?
Sonali, when I started my work about 25 years ago in the field of clinical psychology, people didn't want to talk to me near our ward. No, my friends even, thinking that they would be, others might think that they are taking treatment from me. Now in 2021, I started in 1997, people are willing to talk to me near the ward. And people are also willing to come and get consultations. So there has been a change. I'm really glad about that. There has been a change. People are willing to talk, but of course, as you very rightfully said, more has to be done. And I believe really media has helped tremendously, because having programs like this, inviting psychologists, counselors, psychiatrists and talking about this has helped tremendously. So the positive point is, I see personally, people are really willing, and my colleagues who are in practice have very good caseloads. People are coming forward. They want to talk about their problems. They see that professionals can direct them. Young people can, when you do a program like this from Facebook Messenger, usually you get a lot of people wanting help. So it's a good thing. However, certainly more has to be done. And then again, as we all spoke about, it's again awareness on mental health. That come, talk, if you have a problem, there are professional ways of solving your issues. So that's the way forward.
Thank you very much to all our guests for taking the time to discuss these really important issues for society. Thank you to Nadeem Majid, Azra Asan and Pavani Hapuarachi for asking the right questions. Our guests, Professor Pianjali de Souza, Ms. Manori Piris, Ms. Ferial Ashraf and Ms. Bhumi Harendran. Thank you so much for this beautiful discourse, and I hope that we will be able to make progress as a country. I'd like to leave you with a thought sent in by one of our viewers joining us from the Netherlands. Andrea Trigoso says, on Women's Day, it's important to check your privilege and to make sure your feminism is intersectional and sees and protects all women from all races, nationalities, religions, ethnicities, because fighting only for privileged women is fighting for no women at all. Thank you so much for your participation. Thank you and good night.